You're listening to the Telegraph Cycling Podcast, supported by sigmasport.co.uk, the UK's leading road cycling store.
Friend of the podcast, Paddy McGurk. I listen to the weekly pod wearing one of my free Peddler de Charme t-shirts I received as 40th birthday presents.
Hi, I'm Liz Miller. I download the podcast and take the guys to bed with me. Have to say the husband is not amused when the bed often rocks with my laughter.
I'm Ana Vivas here in Boyacá, Colombia, and I am a huge fan of the cycling podcast because cycling is even more interesting with British accents.
Where are we, Daniel?
We are in the middle of the velodrome, the outdoor velodrome in Roubaix.
Is this acceptable track cycling for you?
Yeah, the inclination on the track is probably under 45 degrees, so I would say it's just about acceptable.
And what's happening? We're standing here on Paris-Roubaix Sunday afternoon. The sun is shining. We're watching the big screen. Give us a little update on what's happening in the race.
Right, it's been what's known in the trade as a rip snorter of a race, hasn't it? And the leaders have just come off the Carrefour de l'Arbre, and Sepp van Mark just got away on that section, which is infamous, really, isn't it? And I was speaking to the president of the Amis de Paris-Roubaix, the association that looks after and maintains the Cobbles earlier, and he sort of confirmed to me what the riders all say. The Carrefour de l'Arbre is the toughest, nastiest section, into a slight headwind as well. But is Van Mark going to be the ultimate party pooper? Is he going to be the Stuart Sink to Tom Boonen's Tom Watson?
Well, it is Masters weekend, Daniel, and I think I'll just about allow that golfing comparison. I think what we've seen in the last 10-15 minutes of the race, as first Luke Rowe and then Ian Stannard put on the pressure, is that the strongest riders have just gravitated to the top just as the pressure goes on, and we've got Van Mark away on his own, and behind that very handy group of Ian Stannard, Tom Boonen and Edvald Boasson-Hagen. It looks like others are managing to get back on. So now we've got the fairly familiar sort of pursuit race now. The worst of the cobbles is probably over.
Yeah, and Van Mark has clearly got his training right this year. Last year he got into form much too early and he really burned out, and the second half of his Classics campaign really fizzled, but he's clearly got it right this time. Whether he's going to stay or not, I don't know. Boonen, you would think, would be very fast in that group behind, but then Boasson-Hagen is also very quick, and the outsider, I suppose, of those three would be Stannard, wouldn't it?
It would, and well, let's watch the rest of the race unfold, and we'll come back and analyse Paris-Roubaix 2016 later on in the programme. Also coming up, we've got a little dispatch from our colleague Richard Moore, who's been at the Tour of the Basque Country, but all that is to come later. Look who it is, Daniel.
It's Ciro.
Hello listeners, really happy to come back after our marvellous evening in London, but we are here in Paris-Roubaix. As usual, I'm not really interested in the race, but I'm here, so if we are obliged to talk about the race, let's talk about the race, no problem.
What's the Italian angle today?
Well, we already knew that Italy didn't have a lot of hopes for this race because our star, the Peacock, Filippo Pozzato, unfortunately his team hasn't been selected for this race. I don't know why. I think it has been really an unfair decision, and so he's not here. I mean, for the future we have seen a quite good Gianni Moscon, this young Italian rider. Certainly, unfortunately, he crashed when 50 Ks to go, but I mean, he's only 21 years old, so maybe it could be a good rider for the cobblestones in the future.
What do you think of cobblestones then, Ciro? Are they the right sort of thing to have in a bike race?
Well, yes, not bad, but cobblestones, you know that for me, sand, for example, is really more interesting than cobblestones. So once a year, cobblestones, why not? But sand every day of the year. This is the difference between sand and cobblestones. Yes.
What a finish, Daniel, eh?
Yes, we need Rob Hatch here, don't we? This is not really our thing, is it, commentary? I'm not sure we can do it justice, but it's Boonen leading first lap of the track, Hayman and Van Mark, and the other two, Wassenhagen and Stannard, are coming back.
They are. It could be a 5-up sprint. That's the bell. 1 lap of the velodrome to go. Everyone in the track centre craning to get a better look as they go around the top of the banking, trying to use the bank to get a bit of speed up. Oh, it's nervous, isn't it? Who's your money on?
Well, they're going about the same speed as you, Richard Moore and Rob Hatch in Manchester the other week. Not going very fast, but they're speeding up now for the final lap.
Here we go then, round the final bend. Hayman's at the front. Boonen looks a bit boxed in. Stannard coming the long way round. But Hayman looks like he's going to hold on for it. What a finish, what a win. Wow. Mat Hayman, Orica-GreenEdge. The second Australian winner after Stuart O'Grady. Only the second non-European winner.
And we don't often see a winner from a group that's gone down the road very, very early, but that's what Hayman did, didn't he? And, I did say, Lionel, didn't I, a while ago, continuing the golf analogies, I said a couple of hours ago that Orica-GreenEdge were leaders in the clubhouse.
Indeed, and they finished it off. I mean, that was a courageous final sprint, particularly when you consider how much Hayman laid on the line in that last little move.
Yeah, and we're just seeing Tom Boonen being carried through the crowd here by Soigneur. Obviously, kind of bittersweet day for him. He rediscovered his form today, but was the bridesmaid, unfortunately.
Here he comes, face covered in dust, still grimacing, wearing a skin suit. Good man. And this is one of the peculiarities of Paris-Roubaix, isn't it? The race is over, the podium positions are finished, and yet riders continue to come in. Your attention's drawn away from all the hubbub in the middle, with riders still coming onto the concrete track, contesting what are now minor places. But it's one of those great ceremonial moments, isn't it, this final lap of the velodrome?
It is, and you have to feel for Boonen, just watching him ride past there. I mean, he could have saved not only his own classic season, but the classic season of his team, and you have to wonder whether this is going to be his last opportunity to win Paris-Roubaix. And we even suspected that he might announce his retirement tonight if he had won. He'd been quite tight-lipped on that earlier this week, and he said he would announce what his plans were after the race today. I think he will carry on, but who knows, if he had won, that might have been the last we'd seen of Tom Boonen.
And yet our winner, Mat Hayman, is older.
37 years old, Mat Hayman.
Just shows you. I mean, it can be a veteran man's race, can't it, Paris-Roubaix? I mean, it's one for just that tough sort of the longevity and the experience and just having all of those miles in the legs and all of that experience to call on.
Yeah, and let's make no mistake, this was not a soft edition of Paris-Roubaix. This was a brutal, all-out war, really, shootout from very, very early on today. We were lucky to see it all on television. It was on for around 7 hours, the whole race. And we saw how much attacking there was in the first hour, and it really didn't continue. And probably the calmest time in the race was the last 10 or 15 kilometres, because everyone is really, or was and is, on their knees.
And yet in those last 5 kilometres, each one of those men in that break played their hand as best they could. There were some real courageous efforts. Tom Boonen made a big move, Ian Stannard made several big moves. Sepp Van Mark probably spent the longest time off the front. Even Edvald Bosenhagen had a little dabble, but it was Mat Hayman who launched that move that looked like, when he got caught by Tom Boonen, that was going to be the end of him, but he's pulled off a fantastic finish there. Let's go and talk to some riders, shall we?
We should, but just to say that, as the Italians say, the graveyards are full of hindsight, but I think Tom Boonen might regret making a couple of moves there towards the end, trying to get away on his own. And he said, didn't he, on the podcast a few weeks ago, we featured him saying that often the key moves go on the asphalt, not on the cobbles, and that's what he tried to do. He tried to get away on the asphalt at the end, and he came up so close to Hayman that he might regret the energy that he spent on those efforts.
Hello, my name's Richard Moore. I'm sort of joined by Daniel Friebe. Hello, Daniel.
Hello.
And Lionel Birnie.
Hello.
Where are we, Lionel?
Well, we're all in different places this week. This is a first for the cycling podcast. I'm at home in my office. Richard, you're in San Sebastian still, are you?
Yeah, it was a trick question. I am. And Daniel's at home.
No, I'm in a secret location. I've not filled out my whereabouts information this week, so if I get tested tonight, I could be in a bit of trouble.
Daniel's in the Ecuadorian embassy, having his hair cut. Anyway, lads, you are just back from Roubaix. We heard there at the start of this episode some very evocative reportage from the Roubaix velodrome. Did you have a nice day out there?
We did, didn't we, Lionel?
Yeah, it was lovely, wasn't it? It's always a lovely day trip to Paris-Roubaix. Went and had a look at the Cobbles, touched the Carrefour de l'Arbre, and then we spent the afternoon in the velodrome waiting for the race to arrive. And it's almost like, sort of, as to quote Sean Kelly, kind of like all the extras from Ben-Hur galloping towards you.
To drop my first name of the podcast, Rich, Christian Prudhomme, friend of the podcast, sidled over afterwards, and I think he summed it up best. He said it was magnifique. It was magnificent, the race itself, wasn't it? The
race was magnificent. Magnificent is a word that I've seen a lot today, because Tom Boonen was magnificent in going for his 5th victory. I was glued to it here in San Sebastian on my Eurosport player, watching it with Spanish commentary. That breakaway, Mat Hayman was a survivor of the early break, and I think a lot of people were rooting for him. He's been there or thereabouts for so long, but usually working for other people. A very strong rider on the pavé, and not a win that anybody would have predicted, but a hugely deserving winner. But Tom Boonen was magnificent. Ian Stannard was magnificent. I said it was like bare knuckle fighting the last few kilometres. These guys were dead on their legs, and the sprint in the velodrome, which you captured so memorably there with your commentary, chaps, if I might say. It was
Rob Hatch is quaking. Rob Hatch is quaking in his boots.
Rob Hatch's position doesn't look quite as secure as it did a few days ago, but it was a slow motion sprint, wasn't it? Because they were dead on their on their feet, and just a fantastic race. I think left everybody breathless.
It is, and you get a fantastic view if you stand in the middle of the velodrome. There's a sort of cordon for the soigneurs, team support staff, and journalists, and you get this perfect view, side-on view, which is kind of like the side-on camera you get nowadays on the Champs-Élysées. You can sort of follow the last 50 metres of the sprint, and you could see Boonen gaining, and it, like you say, it did seem to happen in slow motion. But in the end, he was quite a way short, wasn't he? Well, he was certainly probably a wheel short.
Yeah, and other moments, Team Sky had a lot of bodies in that front group and were working hard. 4 men I think they had there. 3 of them managed to fall off, or 2 of them managed to fall off. Fabien Cancellara as well came off a slippy bit. We saw an incident with a motorbike hitting Elia Viviani, and again that seemed to be, although the rain was promised didn't materialise, it had been raining. Clearly there were some really treacherous sections of pavé, weren't there?
Yeah, I think that the crashes that we saw, often, it's difficult to tell when watching on TV, but often they were the result of just that transition, that momentary transition from a wet bit to a dry bit. And when it's completely wet or completely dry, the riders know exactly how the bike is going to perform, or they've got a better chance of knowing how the bike's going to perform. But when the surface is changing like that, and that wetness just makes the cobbles just so slippery, it's like riding on glass, really. And there are a couple of moments, it doesn't even take a particularly sharp corner to cause a problem, and that looked like the problems that befell Gianni Moscon and Luke Rowe of Sky.
Yeah, and Rich, I spoke to a few riders. Well, I spoke to a couple today, or the day after Paris-Roubaix, and there was one in particular who said, and he didn't want to go on the record with this for probably obvious reasons, but he said he definitely did not want to race Paris-Roubaix again, just because it was too treacherous, and particularly the Arenberg Forest where that crash happened. Not the incident where Viviani rode into the motorbike, but actually the crash that happened seconds before that, which in a way indirectly caused the Viviani incident. But the Arenberg itself was very muddy, and you get grass growing through the cobbles there, and it was pretty nasty by all accounts.
The Arenberg's terrifying, though. It's a really, really bad section. It's just, the surface is abysmal, and because the bunch is still pretty big at that point, The Carrefour de l'Arbre, which is a lot later in the race, is equally bad in terms of road surface, but by then the race has really sorted itself out. Arenberg, there's still, a lot of bodies who are in contention, and everybody wants to try and get through that section as best they can, and so it really is, sort of a hell for leather battle. And there are always crashes there, and it's always, I think the footage of the motorbike crashing into Elia Viviani really brings home just how the TV coverage doesn't really convey exactly what it's like, because the TV coverage is predominantly from those fixed cameras and you see the riders coming towards you, but that side-on shot, although filmed on a mobile phone, you really get the sense of the sort of almost out-of-control speed that the riders are tackling that section at.
And then on the Carrefour de l'Arbre, where we saw Sepp van Mark launch a very early bid for victory, perhaps too early. When he went away, he went off the pavé a bit, and his bike was skipping all over the place. It was Torvill and Dean stuff. It was an incredible feat of bike handling just to keep control of his machine at that point. But I think he rode extremely well, obviously, at Tour of Flanders as well, Van Mark, and he's been knocking on the door of a monument for a few years. Did he throw it away a little bit by putting so much into that solo attack with about 16 kilometres to go?
We said in the velodrome there that he timed his preparation, his training better this year for the Cobble Classics. Last year he got it all wrong and he looked a shadow of the rider he had been in previous years. So he's obviously on good form, but Philippe Bouvet, who is really the doyen of Paris-Roubaix riding, his father Albert Bouvet, very influential in the organisation of Paris-Roubaix in years gone by, and Philippe himself is. But Philippe said that he really still lacks something, the tiny little extra ingredient, Sepp van Mark, and I would kind of agree with him. He's announced today, or he's told the press today, that he's probably going to leave Lotto Jumbo at the end of the year. Maybe that will be the difference, him changing teams. Be interesting to see where he ends up, because the Paris-Roubaix again highlighted how Essex Quickstep might be on the lookout for a leader. We think that Sagan is a possibility for them, but if Boonen doesn't stick around, and he would have retired yesterday if he'd won, he's confirmed that. Maybe Van Mark could be an alternative for them. But yesterday I thought that while on one hand they were very strong and they had strength in numbers again, I just thought they exposed Boonen with their strength. You can ride that way if you've got the strongest rider in the race, and you've got the strongest rider in the race. But really, Tony Martin kind of dragged Boonen to the front and dropped him there in a minefield, really, of riders from 15, 20 other teams, and he was on his own ultimately, wasn't he? Whether that would have made any difference in the end, I don't know. Hayman, I think, was the strongest guy on the day.
Although Boonen, a heroic effort, and he came out with a great quote I saw after the race: "If you try to win the race, it's possible you lose it," he said. And he certainly was on the front foot all race, possibly too early, but he certainly did try to win it. And it's an experienced riders' race, isn't it? Hayman's 37, Boonen's 35, Sepp van Mark's only 27, so he'll have more chances, as will Ian Stannard. You guys spoke to some people in the velodrome after the race finished. Would you like to tee up one of these or a couple of these interviews, chaps?
Well, yeah, I was just standing in the middle there. It's kind of chaotic, isn't it? All the riders are coming in round the track, and the people who've already finished are sort of trying to recover on the grass. Some are sitting down, they're getting drinks and a bit of a wipe down from the soigneurs, and it's kind of, you just see these little moments. And one moment that I just stood back and watched was Luke Durbridge, who'd had a fantastic race. He'd been right up there in the early stages. As he says, he had some bad luck at some key times, but he came into the centre on the grass, hopped over the barrier and sprinted across to the podium because he knew Mat Hayman was over there. And I don't think he knew at that point whether or not Hayman had actually won or not. Luke, saw you get off your bike there and you jumped over the barrier to go and congratulate Matt. What actually happened over there?
Oh, I just grabbed him like you wouldn't believe. Still unbelievably speechless. Like, it's one of those things that you just, for Matt, done 15 Roubaix, and he probably questioned himself, it maybe never happened. But It's unbelievable.
And you look like, as a team, you played it perfectly. You had strength in numbers early on. You had men up the road. Was the game plan as well set out as we perhaps thought it had been executed?
I think in this race we sort of like, in one situation we were in a bad situation, in one situation we were in the perfect situation. When I came across to Hayman's group, I punctured and I had to get a wheel, and I came back and then I punctured again. So like for myself, I was a bit shitty because I was like, I had good legs as well, but it doesn't matter anymore. It really doesn't matter as long as one guy is up there, and what a more deserving guy than Mat Hayman. So.
And how did you hear that he had won? Did it come over the radio?
No, not at all. I didn't believe it. I just saw him get interviewed, and I just came in and saw the doctor, and he was saluting, and I just can't believe it.
Well, have a good one tonight.
So that was Luke Durbridge there, Orica-GreenEdge rider, teammate of Mat Hayman, and Orica-GreenEdge, they've won a few monuments now. And, you know, put Hayman in the early break. A good plan, executed well.
Yeah, it was, and I sort of said, again, another golf analogy, unfortunately. I suggested with about 110, 120 kilometres to go that they were leaders in the clubhouse because they had about 3 riders in contention. There were 4 riders at a time when Quickstep, as we'd said, had Tony Martin hanging on by a thread and then Boonen waiting in the wings. But Orica-GreenEdge have emerged from this classic season with a monument again, and Sky have not managed to break their duck in monuments. But Orica-GreenEdge it's an interesting contrast between them and Team Sky, because they do like to give the impression that they're happy-go-lucky and that they're just out to have a good time, and they don't really shout too much about everything they're doing in terms of sports science and, you know, marginal gains. But, you know, you speak to people around the peloton, and I don't think they've got too much to envy a lot of the very, very top teams in those departments. You know, I think they work very hard on equipment and clothing, that kind of thing. And, you know, it's another team that really looked a bit of a mess when they launched. The first season, I remember their first Tour de France, they were a very forlorn presence by the end of the race. Not dissimilar to Team Sky in that respect. But they've kind of got their act together, haven't they, the last few years? And they've pulled out some really good results. And they look a really well-rounded roster now. They've got riders for pretty much every season, and you know they've got Caleb Ewan emerging now as a very fine sprinter. They've got the Yates brothers looking good, and then you know Hayman is a sure bet to at least turn in good performances in the classics, and he's been rewarded now with a victory in Paris-Roubaix.
Well, we'll hear a bit more about the Yates brothers later on in my dispatch from the Basque Country, but another team that's really been on fire this year, I think is fair to say, Dimension Data. Edvald Boasson-Hagen is reborn there, and I think you spoke, Daniel, to their Direct Sportif Roger Hammond afterwards, didn't you? Yeah, I did, and like you say, that is a team that is really revitalising its riders, and I think we've talked in the past on the podcast about Rolf Aldag, who's come in there from Ethics Quickstep, and the influence he would probably have. But Hammond himself, you know, the riders at that team have raved about him this year. Mark Cavendish has said that he's the best director sportif he's ever had, and Hammond, of course, almost won Paris-Roubaix himself in 2004, and he's had a great effect, it looks to me, on Edvald Boasson-Hagen, who came pretty close at Milan-San Remo and again came very close at the weekend. And I thought he played his cards really smartly, considering he probably didn't have that much energy left and he didn't follow all the moves. So here is Roger Hammond talking to me in Roubaix on Sunday about Edvald Boasson-Hagen and his team's ride at Paris-Roubaix.
I love to say, you know, it's all me, but it's Dimension Data have relaunched. You know, they're relaunching all of the riders here. You know, it's they've given him freedom, they've given him the confidence, and then we give him the support and the belief, and Eddie does the rest. So I just don't think he's not a different rider. He's growing, of course. Every year he's a bit stronger and a bit older, but the big difference is the fact that he's now, you know, able to ride himself and learn from the people that have come on board here. You know, we've got Rolf Aldag with all of his experience, and then the existing sports directors and myself hopefully can just chip in my 2 penneth worth every so often. You know, in those last few Ks, it's always hard to start, you know, giving instruction. I mean, it's one of those things. Once you get to the end of a 260k race, it's all very well for me to say, well, I'll just ride after set my marker, close the gap, and sit on. I mean, but if you haven't got the legs to do it, you've got to make those decisions. So we give a general plan. Gave him what I thought he ought to do, you know, approaching the final. And then he had to make those decisions himself, because I always find that if you sow a seed into a rider's head, they do it whatever, because then they're in a difficult situation. You know, do they go against if they don't win, then there's a lot of pressure on their shoulders because they go against what I said to do and don't win. So then they tend to default to doing what you say, and that might not be the right thing. I think what we can do is give advice of where he should be, who's strong there, and what he should look out for, and that's it. And then he has to do the rest with his legs. But I think the problem in this final was just the fact that Eddie was national champion, had such a spectacular start of the year. I would have been afraid if I was any of those other 4 riders bringing Eddie to the track. So I don't think there was any real help. I don't think they rode against him, but I just don't think they really wanted to help him. So that was a big race. I mean, you know, when you've got somebody like Cancellara hanging at 30 seconds for about 80k, then you know it was a race. So yeah, there was no holding back. And I think those guys in the front rode a hell of a race. And you know, I'm sure everyone's going to talk about how Cancellara was crashed or Sagan wasn't there or whatever it was. Yeah, but you know, there was an opportunity. They all had teammates chasing back and they couldn't catch him. For me, the guys in the front were riding even better, because then they're looking at each other and still holding Sagan and Cancellara off. So you know, they did a hell of a ride in the front.
Eurosport, the home of cycling.
So you heard there our Eurosport jingle. Thank you very much to them for their sponsorship of the Cycling Podcast. And coming up on Eurosport in the next few days, the Amstel Gold Race, the first of the Ardennes Classics, if it is an Ardennes Classic. We've discussed that before in the podcast. Wednesday the 20th, Flèche Wallonne, that's definitely an Ardennes Classic. And then on the 24th, the next monument, Liège-Bastogne-Liège. There's also on live on Eurosport the Tour of Croatia from Wednesday the 20th, that same day as Flèche Wallonne. And then showing the Tour of Turkey as well from the 24th. So lots coming up on Eurosport. Thank you very much to them for their sponsorship, and to our new sponsor, sigmasport.co.uk. We'll hear their longer jingle a bit later in this episode. But I'd like to welcome them because I wasn't in the podcast last week, and I've been a loyal customer of Sigma Sport for a while, so I'm delighted that they've decided to sponsor the podcast for this month. Thank you to them.
What have you bought at Sigma Sport?
Actually, Daniel, I bought a rear mech hanger for a very old frame. It was very hard, a very hard to find part.
Judging by your results in the Trainer Road Challenge, I think you need a new bike. A new skin suit, perhaps.
I didn't have a rear mech hanger for the Trainer Road Challenge, but no, they found one for me, which was quite a hard find. So thanks to them for that, belatedly. We'll mention them again later on. I think we want to return. We've got to get onto my Basque. I'm a bit worried we're going to run out of time for my Tour of the Basque Country report.
There's a lot to talk about, Rich. There's a lot to talk about from Paris-Roubaix. It was one of the great additions, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, it was a great addition. And I think, Lionel, you were wanting to come back in and talk a little bit about Mat Hayman.
You know, the fairy tale victory would have been for Tom Boonen, wouldn't it? It would have made him a 5-time winner, who would have overtaken or pulled clear of Roger de Vlaming as the man with the most Paris-Roubaix wins. I think last year or the year before we spoke to Tom Boonen on the podcast, and I said, what would they call him if he ever won a 5th Paris-Roubaix, considering de Vlaming is called Mr. Paris-Roubaix, whether Tom Boonen would have to become Lord Paris-Roubaix or Sir Paris-Roubaix. He sidestepped that and played that down, very modest of him. But there's a sense, isn't there, with a sort of surprise victory, as we saw with Mat Hayman, that, you know, perhaps, you know, do we kind of see it as a sort of just reward for the race that we'd watched? It had been one of the greatest one-day races I can remember watching, and you have to say, really, you know, Mat Hayman pulled off an absolute masterstroke at the finish. It was really, when you look back at the sprint, he used the banking very cleverly. He went high on one of the corners and just got that little bit of extra speed, got himself in front. And when it is one of those slow motion, very fatigued sprint finishes, being in front means so much more perhaps than it does in, say, a bunch sprint finish. When you're in a small group like that, it's almost like possession being 9/10 of the law. Once you're in front, people have got to come round you, and he thought that through pretty well, I think. And considering he's been a professional since 2000, I think that was his 15th or 16th Paris-Roubaix. Finished almost all of them. I think he was outside the time limit once, and he's just one of those domestiques, really, that has singled out Paris-Roubaix as the race for him. He always finishes it.
He's also a rider who's finished 8th and 10th in Paris-Roubaix, and I don't think he goes down as a surprise winner at all. I think the surprise is that he's not shown more in these races over the years. And I think, I spoke to him when he was at Team Sky, and he was so highly rated at that team as a workhorse. And he talked about the fact that he had become a sort of domestique de luxe, especially in these races. It was a long time before he even rode the Tour de France, Mat Hayman. He was always overlooked for that race. And I asked him why he hadn't sort of stepped up to lead any team in any race, and he said it was a lack of confidence. And I think, he's one of these riders who decides fairly early on in his career that the way to carve out a good career is to become a domestique. And if you do that, you just never get the opportunity. And now that he's been given the opportunity, or he's created the opportunity for himself really at 37, he's shown what he's capable of. And I don't think that his win is a surprise at all, in the same bracket as Johan van Summeren a few years ago, or who rode away when the favourites were looking at each other. This was not a lucky win at all.
I think he has been hamstrung by his humility in a way, but I was going to just throw it back to you, Lionel, in a minute. I was going to ask you, how could you mention Roger de Vlamingh and not also tell us that Roger de Vlamingh was very, very upset. He would have been very, very upset that if Tom Boonen had won. He actually told the Belgian press that today, that he was pretty pleased that Tom Boonen didn't win yesterday and take his record. It might not be the time to fully elaborate on the cockfighting story that we think.
We've got to keep people listening. We've got to keep people listening.
Keep people listening for that. Sorry, Lionel, you weren't going to say something.
I was just going to say, Mat Hayman, just to sort of sum up, what sort of willingness to work and put himself through the ringer. I remember 2006, he rode Milan-San Remo. This was when he was with Rabobank. He rode Milan-San Remo one weekend. He won the Commonwealth Games road race in Melbourne the following weekend, and then he was back in Europe the weekend after that, and he finished the Tour of Flanders. And I always remember that and thinking he went basically. I know international travel to the other side of the world, it can be made pretty comfortable these days, but that's quite a schedule for an elite athlete to kind of, jet set around like that.
The Commonwealth Games road race has to be the hardest event in the world. I was actually there in Melbourne. I was there in Melbourne in 2006, and it was the Commonwealth Games road race is not the hardest race in the world. It's not the highest level in the world, but he won that race on his own. He was out front on his own for a long time, and it was as impressive a performance as you could get in that race. And I thought then,
Richard, before you dive into your own reflection, a la Narcissus, can I just ask you what you meant the other day? I was actually on the day of Paris-Roubaix itself. I couldn't work out whether you were being sarcastic when you said you could see what I'd meant about Peter Sagan's position on the cobbles.
I was talking about his aerodynamics, and you were making a great play last week in the podcast, which I listened to with great interest, about how a lot of riders who excel in Paris-Roubaix ride on the drops, on the cobbles, and I just sort of was looking out for that, watching Paris-Roubaix at the weekend, and I did notice that a lot of the top riders were riding on the drops, on the cobbles, and Sagan wasn't, and he was very upright. Now, it wasn't aerodynamics that cost him the victory on Sunday, but it was quite noticeable, and perhaps there's something in that theory that that if you can get down low on the cobbles, where you are generally in the wind, because you're not, you're often trying to find a good line rather than sitting close behind somebody else. It could make a difference.
Yeah, and I think a couple of people made good points on Twitter that it's a trade-off, and I think we hinted at this last week. It's a compromise. I mean, what Sagan loses in aerodynamics, he might well gain in control, and we saw another incredible example of that yesterday, where he bunny-hopped over Fabian Cancellara and stayed upright. And, his record, we said it last week, but his record of finishing these races is pretty extraordinary if you go back. I mean, he might disappoint you in terms of actually getting the result, and his record in monuments is still not that amazing. Okay, he's won one now, but the number of times he's contended and just been in the shake-up is quite incredible, and I think it owes in large part to his bike handling.
Do we have a little bit of Patrick Lefevere to hear, Daniel?
We do have some Patrick Lefevere, Richard. We have Patrick Lefevere's last word on the Cobbled Classics, his last word on Paris-Roubaix as well. And I suppose what should probably be our last word on Paris-Roubaix. Patrick Lefevere, as we all probably know, has been very, very disgruntled at how other teams have ridden in this Classics campaign. Not so much his own team. We've all criticised Ethics Quickstep, but Lefevere is adamant that the world has been against them during this Classics campaign. And here he was on Sunday telling me that in no uncertain terms. Patrick, I know you're a manager, you're supposed to keep emotion out of it, but you must be heartbroken almost to see Tom come up so close.
I'm very sad for him, because at the end he's the athlete, he deserved to win his 5th. He did everything to it, starting with retire on the other competitors. He did have a winter, but at the end, every day he needed to come back to the level today, and he was here.
Your Classics campaign, the team's Classics campaign, have you got anything to reproach your riders? Or
Yes, they were too good.
And not enough work from other
and
teams?
And they had balls, what I didn't saw in much other teams. I'm sorry for this.
So there you have it. Ethics Quickstep riders are the only ones with any balls. What do we think of that?
Is this another golf analogy? He's a brilliant grumpy man, isn't he, Patrick Lefevere? He's sort of the opposite of an avuncular uncle. I mean, he is avuncular, really, actually. But when things don't go his way, he can be exceptionally and hugely entertainingly grumpy, as we've seen on a few occasions. Now, the Cobble Classics haven't quite finished for us, have they, Daniel? We've got a few extra little treats coming up.
We've got a special series of Kilometre Zero, so we're going to take you behind the scenes of the Spring Classics. It's what we've called Survivors of Spring series. It's sponsored by Wellbricks. Wellbricks, they are a kind of pavé, in fact, a kind of cobblestone, but much more comfortable to lie on and roll around on if you want. And its trigger point massage is it's all the rage in recovery, and Wellbricks are going to be our sponsors throughout this Survivors of Spring series.
So this is 4 episodes of Kilometre Zero, each one looking at a different aspect of the Classics, and they will be coming up over the next couple of weeks.
You're listening to the Telegraph Cycling Podcast, supported by sigmasport.co.uk, the UK's leading road cycling store. Use the code podcast10 at the checkout to receive £10 off your next order of £50 or more.
So we heard there our extended sigmasport.co.uk jingle. I've already welcomed them, but welcome again. Thank you very much, sigmasport.co.uk, the home of road cycling, for sponsoring the podcast. We had a really nice reaction from people who are obviously customers of the shop and the mail order service, and also listeners to the podcast. If you do buy something from Sigma Sport, then do say that you heard about them through the podcast, even if you didn't, because that'll reflect well on us, wouldn't it?
Isn't there a code, Rich? Isn't there a code for customers to when they check out, if they spend over £50 and they put in podcast 10 as a code, they get £10 off their next order? Is that how it works?
If you paid attention to that jingle, Lionel, you'll have heard the full instructions about just how to do that.
Well, I don't want to pull back the curtain on how we record these things, but I haven't heard the jingle.
He's zoned out of it there. Now listen, are we going to get round to the Basque Country at all? I'm still here. I'm still recovering from a very cold and wet week in the Basque Country.
Well, Rich, I was going to ask you, because this is the time of the season really where there's the greatest contrast between the races that's going on. You've got the Cobbles of the Tour of Flanders and the crosswinds of Scheldeprijs, and then more Cobbles of Paris-Roubaix. And while all of the Classics riders are doing those races, all the skinny climbers and the stage racing specialists are in what looked like a beautiful green, although the weather didn't look particularly warm and welcoming, it looked like beautiful countryside over there, and a fantastic race. Rich, how was it?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, we did our little Basque Country special episode last year when I was here in San Sebastian, and it is a very distinctive and unusual little corner of Europe. It did occur to me, and I did an interview with Warren Barguil, the Breton, and he was saying just how much the Basque Country reminded him of Brittany, which is another hotbed of cycling in Europe. And I was thinking the other hotbed is Belgium, and all these places begin with B. I don't know if there's anything in that, but when you think about these little pockets of a really rich cycling culture, you do think of Brittany, the Basque Country, and Belgium. Anywhere else that begins with B? I'm not sure.
Richard, I hope your wife knows about your trips to the Basque Country. I hope there's no shenanigans. We don't want any of that, the cycling podcast.
She's here now, Daniel. Yeah, we've combined it with a little holiday, so that's been
that's a relief.
Jolly pleasant. But no, it was a fantastic week's racing. Alberto Contador ended up the winner. It was a very clinical performance from him. He saved it best till last, winning the time trial on the final day, which was a really tough up and down time trial, a difficult climb there, a very technical descent in wet conditions. Nairo Quintana took a very strange bike change with about 4 or 5 kilometres to go onto a low profile bike. Don't think that helped him. In fact, it may well have cost him the stage. But it was a great week's racing. Really, a very popular win for Samuel Sanchez, who's not quite a Basque, but he's an adopted Basque. And yeah, it was great. Just a shame about the weather, but you wouldn't have that lush green countryside without the rain, I guess. So, will we go straight into my Basque report? You'll hear a little bit from Larry Warbasse, quite an odd little bit from Larry Warbasse at the beginning. We'll hear from Neil Stevens.
Richard, this little bit from Larry Warbasse, is this the bit that you referred to or you prefaced by telling me or by asking me, do you think this is going to be the moment when people accuse the cycling podcast of jumping the shark? Is it that particular strange bit? It is exactly that moment, yes, Daniel.
We'll hear from Javier Artecha, the Team Sky coach, who's from the Basque Country. We'll hear from Mikel Landa. Who else will we? Steve Cummings as well is in this little clip. So here we go. Here's my Basque Country Tour of the Basque Country report.
Later, when it began to get dark, I walked around the harbour and out along the promenade, and finally back to the hotel for supper.
You're listening to Ernest Hemingway. Well, in fact, you're listening to Larry Warbasse, the I Am cycling rider who was taking part in the Tour of the Basque Country and who, like Ernest Hemingway, is from the Midwest. Here, Larry is reading from Hemingway's novel, The Sun Also Rises. It's a bit that describes an encounter with the second ever Tour of the Basque Country in 1925.
There was a bicycle race on, the Tour de Pays Basque, and the riders were stopping that night in San Sebastian. In the dining room, at one side, there was a long table of bicycle riders, eating with their trainers and managers. They were all French and Belgians and paid close attention to their meal, but they were having a good time. At the head of the table were 2 good-looking French girls. I could not make out whom they belonged to. They all spoke in slang at the long table, and there were many private jokes and some jokes at the far end that were not repeated when the girls asked to hear them. The next morning at 5 o'clock, the race resumed with the last lap, San Sebastian-Bilbao. The bicycle riders drank much wine and were burned and browned by the sun. They did not take the race seriously except among themselves. They had raced among themselves so often that it did not make much difference who won, especially in a foreign country. The money would be arranged. The man who had a matter of 2 minutes lead in the race had an attack of boils, which were very painful. He sat on the small of his back. His neck was very red and the blonde hairs were sunburned. The other riders joked about him and his boils. He tapped on the table with his fork. "Listen," he said, "tomorrow my nose is so tight on the handlebars that the only thing touches those boils is a lovely breeze." One of the girls looked at him down the table, and he grinned and turned red. The Spaniards, they said, did not know how to pedal.
In this year's Tour of the Basque Country, held in April rather than August, as it was back in Hemingway's day, there was absolutely no danger of necks burnt red or hair bleached blonde by the sun. Because the sun didn't rise, there was no sun. That was the sound of rain falling at the start of Stage 2. It was to prove a very familiar sound over the course of the week. And in the morning, I sought some shelter and spoke to Team Sky's Basque coach, Javier Artecha, mainly about the team's Basque rider, Mikel Landa, who has been ill and came into his home tour a bit short of racing. Nevertheless, much was expected of Landa on Stage 2, his home stage. But I started by asking Javier if this was typical Basque weather.
Yeah, this is typical Basque Country. We had worse weather some years with also with the snow and always raining. To be honest, it's not the worst Basque Country's weather, so for us it's something normal.
1 minute raining very heavily, next minute warm sunshine.
We are going to different valleys today, and we can find different weather in each valley. For clothing and for the riders, it's a bit difficult to choose what is the best clothing to start the race.
Now you've got your Basque star here, Mikel Landa, who's been a bit unwell at the start of the year. What's his health like at the moment?
Yeah, I think all is going well. He's feeling well. He had some health issues at the beginning of the season. Now he's feeling well. He did a good copy Bartali. Obviously, this is another level race, and he needs to go day by day. We have 1 month until the Giro, so it's better to don't put pressure on him. But yeah, his shape is not a problem now.
That's the sound the following morning in Vitoria of school children singing Mikel Landa's name. So Javier Artecha was right. Landa was in good shape, and he won that stage 2 ahead of Wilco Kelderman, with those two having gone clear on the very steep climb to the finish. Landa also took the overall lead, and the next morning in the beautiful city of Vitoria, the political capital of the Basque Country, I spoke again to Artecha. Javier, you told me yesterday morning that Mikel Landa was good and strong and back to full health, and he proved it on the stage. You were right.
This is a big talent, and racing here at home with all the supporters. Yesterday we passed for a few meters from his home. For him was a special day.
And you said that he actually designed the course yesterday.
Yeah, if you see, every year the stage here around Vitoria always finish in the city in Vitoria. This year they want to do something different, and Mikel was the designer of the stage, so it seems that he prepares the stage for him.
Well, he must know that climb, and it's a really steep. Is that a climb that he rides a lot in training, or?
No, it was a new climb. Also the tarmac was new, especially for this stage, because before, when I came here to see the climb, because it's a new climb also for us, I live here, but I never seen this climb. The tarmac was really old, and some parts of the climb without tarmac, but he did a couple of times the climb to check really well for this stage.
It caught a lot of people out, I think, because it was so steep and people weren't sure when to make the effort. He went quite early with Wilco Kelderman, but he's looking around a lot. Was that because he was worried people were coming back, or was it a sign of his confidence?
He asked to Sergio what Sergio wanted to do it, and Sergio said to him, okay, if you have legs, try to go to the front. I can't wait to the other GC guys like Contador, Purito and another guys. Mikel tried just to the bottom, following Kelderman, and it was a good tactic for the team. We won the stage. Also Sergio was strong at the finish, so now we are well positioned in the GC, and let's see for the next days.
In Vitoria, I took advantage of a very brief but welcome bit of sunshine to speak to an adopted Basque, Neil Stevens, now the Director Sportif at Orica-GreenEdge. Stevens moved there in 1989 and now lives in a village close to San Sebastian. I asked him about the cycling culture in the Basque Country, and also about the Yates twins, Adam and Simon, who perhaps didn't live up to the great expectations that surround them.
In 1989, the first time I came here was because the team Caja Rural was based here. It was funny because they gave me accommodation, basically. That was the reason I moved here. Then I started to really enjoy the atmosphere of the Basque Country, the lifestyle, the way the people are, really good-natured people. So when it came time to change teams, well, I didn't really need to change the area I lived in. Obviously, when I met my wife in 1992, that helped. That was another reason to stay in the area. And yeah, it's a very sporting culture, really good-natured people, and it's a very competitive area. I think the reason cycling is so popular here, the amateur cycling here is very, very, very strong, and it's the hub of cycling within Spain.
And is that scene still very strong here? I mean, this race obviously depends a lot on volunteers and people like that, and there's quite a few races in clubs and under 23 teams and so on. Is that scene, because it's dying in other parts of the world, especially in Europe, is it still as strong as ever here?
I think you'll see that on the side by the side of the road. Yesterday we had a really bad weather stage, 7-8 degrees rain, and the roads were still packed. I think you'll see that today with a little bit of sunshine comes out. But even not only on the Tour of the Basque Country, the classic San Sebastian, but on the roads at the Tour de France as well. the Basque population really get out there in strength, and they love a day out. They love to watch a sporting event, and in this case cycling, they really love it.
It must have given you great pleasure to see Adam Yates win in San Sebastian last year, albeit he didn't know that he'd won. But can you tell me a bit about the Yates brothers? Maybe not the performance yesterday that we expected from them. Are they? Because I know they've been targeting overall here. Are they in good health? What's the situation with them?
It's a bit of a two-pronged question. You've got to look at. You say they didn't perform that well yesterday, but they're actually, in fact, only 50 seconds down. They were with the front group until the last 500 metres, and so it's not that they're that bad. They were missing just that little bit, and it is. You got to say it's a little bit disappointing. Whether it was the weather, I think it was more than anything. Whether a bit of an overexcitement, they were really keen to do well, not only in the general classification but also in the stage, and they may have put a little bit of too much pressure on themselves. They're not going bad. They were certainly involved in the day before, where Gerrans nearly pulled off the stage win as well. It's not over for us. We'll still have a crack on another stage, but certainly general classification is finished for us here.
I mean, they've been with you a couple of years and developing incredibly well. Is there not pressure but an expectation this year that they'll step up and start converting maybe top 5, top 6 places into wins?
This year's not a special year. I think that it would come right from the start. There's a hope and a desire and there's support there. Before pressure there's support. And we've supported them right from the start to try to get the best out of themselves. But it's not. It's got to be this year, and it's a big pressure year. It's another step in their career. The next step in their career is to try to be more consistent with their results, and I think that we're on track in doing that. So pressure this year to do anything, not any more than any other year, but certainly a lot of support to try to let them achieve their goals.
There's very little to tell apart with them, and not just in terms of how they look, but how they ride. What are the differences in them as riders that you've managed to figure out in the last couple of years?
There's a heap of difference, really. I think the longer I know them, the more I remind them they're just two bike riders that happen to be brothers and happen to look very much alike. I think right from the start, with not only with the Yates boys, but with any twins, you got to remember that they're two different personalities. You can't treat them as one. And they're the boys who got the longer I know them, the more differences there are. And so it's more becoming what similarities they've got more than what differences they've got.
So how does that translate into races? Are we going to see them targeting different races, or is one better stage race rider, another better one-day rider?
Yeah, I can't give away too many secrets. Up until this stage, Adam has performed better in one-day races, and Simon's performed better in the general classifications. That's not to say one of them's better than the other one. At the moment, they've just had results in different areas. I tend to think that if Simon had a few more of Adam's characteristics, he'd be better. And I think if Adam had a few more of Simon's characteristics, he'd be better as well. So I think they've got to learn a lot to learn of each other.
Probably hear the helicopter coming into land there, the TV helicopter. I'm at the finish in Lasaka at the end of stage 3. Technically, we're in Navarre rather than the Basque Country. Although I just asked somebody whether that was indeed the case, and they said it depends who you speak to. So a bit of a question mark over whether we're in Navarre or the Basque Country. But Miguel Indurain, who was from Navarre, was also claimed as a Basque during his career, so it's all a bit vague. In Lasaka, end of stage 3, I was at the finish where there's no big screen, expecting to see Danny Navarro, who'd been on the attack, but instead it was Steve Cummings who came up the finish straight. Very similar victory to the one he claimed in Tirreno Adriatico with a late opportunistic attack, something he's getting really good at ever since he won a stage of the Tour de France last year, of course, in Mende. He's not exactly a young rider, Steve Cummings, but he seems to be getting better with age. And here he is coming on to the podium. An appreciative round of applause. Not a huge crowd here at the finish, it's a pretty remote place, but big crowds on the climbs again today as there were yesterday. Really impressive. There we go, as I just said, the winner of today's stage, Steve Cummings. And he's been presented with a big silver trophy and something else that looks a bit odd. Anyway, I caught up with Steve Cummings just after the finish line. He was recovering with a can of Coke, and just grabbed a first instant reaction from him after his stage win here at the Tour of the Basque Country. Steve, you're making quite a habit of this. Was that a plan today, or was it just the opportunity?
Every day with a finish like that, I plan to try. I tried the first day, and then, it's hard to climb with the best. But then when you're over, it feels like a slow motion bunch sprint, because there's only really climbers left. So,
are you getting better as well at just timing it right and spotting these opportunities?
Yeah, I think so.
Experience?
More confident as well, and calm. And
something about this team as well, you get a bit more of a free hand to play?
Yeah, I'm totally free, and they really believe in me, and I'm very grateful that they give me the opportunities they do. So
congratulations, you already had a good season then, haven't you?
Yeah.
You can stop now.
Yeah, thank you.
I also grabbed a quick word with the man who was still in the overall lead, Mikel Landa. Yeah, yesterday, the stage, I believe you designed the stage yesterday, so you knew the climb. Were you surprised at how strong you felt on the climb?
Yeah, it was a surprise also for me. As you say, I know very well that climb. It's very close to my house, and I tried from the top, from the back of the climb, because I had Sergio behind, looking to the grand leader, so I had that advantage, I think.
It must give you great confidence to have won the stage and to take the leader's jersey here.
Yeah, for me it's a lot of confidence and a lot of motivation for the next races.
Have you designed any of the other stages?
No. No.
But are you confident you can keep hold of the yellow jersey now?
It's going to be hard work. I don't have too much days of competition, and I think the last days I will pay that. But I'm going to be happy saying I have this green jersey.
Landa said that he expected to run out of steam towards the end of the week, and that indeed proved to be the case. On the last road stage, which finished at the summit of Arat, high above the town of Eibar, whose cycling club incidentally started the Tour of the Basque Country way back in 1924, Landa acted as a foil for Sergio Henao, forcing Alberto Contador in particular to chase. When Landa was caught, Contador went clear with Henao, while Nairo Quintana dropped back a bit. Diego Rosa took the win, Henao took the jersey, but Contador was breathing down his neck, and the Spaniard put in an incredible time trial on the final day, with the rain falling once again, to take the stage, and his fourth Vuelta al País Vasco. Quintana and Henao were also on the podium, but a word for Thibaut Pinot, who was fourth but rode a very solid week in the Basque Country. I did an interview with his brother and the coach FDJ, Julien Pinot, about the team's dramatic improvement this year. Do listen out for that interview in a future episode. But at the end of a very tough week, that final road stage was absolutely brutal. Wet, cold, 8 climbs, none particularly high, but all very steep and on these narrow Basque roads, which made the climbs terrible and the descents treacherous. Fabio Aru, Dan Martin and rider Hesjedal were among the star riders who abandoned, and so was our Hemingway, Larry Warbasse. Larry had crashed the day before, and when I saw him in Orio, just along the coast from San Sebastian on the penultimate morning, he was quite bashed up, but I caught up with him after the stage anyway. Before we hear from him again, I'll just take this opportunity to plug our next Friends special, which features Larry with his niece flatmate Joe Dombrowski and their neighbour Ian Boswell. But to finish this little dispatch from the Basque Country, I asked Larry to tell us just how hard the week had been.
Every year, País Vasco is known as one of the hardest races, and yeah, unfortunately didn't go the best for me this year. I crashed yesterday and then had to stop today, partly because of that, so that's unfortunate. But aside from that, yeah, it's been a really rough race. Always is, but this year especially. The courses were really hard, which they're usually pretty hard, but this year there really was not an easy stage, and that made it difficult, as well as we had some of the worst weather conditions that I think we could have possibly had. Those two things combined really made it a difficult race this year.
I mean, it's a beautiful region. It's very green. We know now why it's so green. There's a lot of rain.
Yeah, I think this is the Basque Country. I think if we call it Spain, we might offend some people. but yeah, it is funny because everyone always jokes, "Hey, we're going to Spain," but we all know that you never know what you're going to get when you come to the Basque Country. And I did the race last year, and I think we had actually great weather, so that really makes it a bit more enjoyable because it is a beautiful region. It is a cool place. It's totally different from almost anywhere I've ever been in Europe, with the culture and the geography and everything, and it's really a special place, but yeah, it can be brutal.
I guess when you come here as well, you start to understand why so many of the Basque riders are such good climbers.
Yeah, I don't know if that's why they do the race like that, is because the Basque riders are good climbers or just because of the nature of the Basque Country. But yeah, I mean, the hills here are crazy, and it seems like they just throw every single one they have here at us. so yeah, we've gone up some pretty tough ones this week.
It's difficult, isn't it, for you personally, because it's never nice to not finish a race, but you've always got a decision to make about what's the most sensible thing to do, thinking longer term. You've got the Giro coming up. How do you square that when you're riding and when you're sort of being trying to be rational about it, but emotionally I'm sure you want to carry on?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we probably do too many irrational things in cycling, but yeah, it is one of the hardest things. I think this is actually I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure this is the first stage race I haven't finished since I was a neo-pro. Actually, no, I also crashed out the last day of Tour California one year too. Okay, so not, but it's been a while, and yeah, it's a really difficult thing to do, and I think you always want to start or to finish what you started, and so yeah, but I had a crash yesterday, and you have to sort of weigh up whether keeping on fighting is going to have any benefit for you. And, if we had a big leader that I was riding for here, then of course you absolutely give every last ounce of everything you can to help them until you can't anymore. But that wasn't the case here. And unfortunately, I couldn't help our guy for the Mountains jersey today because he was in the breakaway and I was not there. So yeah, it's tough.
This is the Telegraph Cycling Podcast. Join us on Twitter and Facebook. Just search online for the Cycling Podcast.
I thought that was terrific, Rich. Larry Warbasse quoting Hemingway there.
More than quoting, reading half the novel.
Well, yeah, exactly. Should declare my interest here. That was in the Cycling Anthology, of course.
Wonderful chapter by Brendan Gallagher.
What was that Jaws theme music playing in the background?
Don't recall that,
Jumping
Daniel.
Sharks? No?
Gee whiz.
But that was excellent, Rich. Much like the race itself, there were several highlights from the race. I thought Steve Cummings pulling off another surprise win with very similar to his win at Tirreno Adriatico a few weeks ago, sort of similar to his stage win at the Tour de France in Mende last year when he caught everybody napping. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how many more times he gets away with that.
Well, I wonder if we'll still call it a surprise when he does it an 8th and 9th and 10th time, because he does. It's a fairly familiar trick now, isn't it? But again, a bit like Mat Hayman, he's not a young rider at all, but it's taken him this long to find an environment that really suits him and to ride the way that he wants. I mean, if you watch a bike race that Steve Cummings is in, he is invariably sitting last man in the bunch, or second or third last man. He rides at the back of the bunch. It'd be interesting if he goes to the Tour de France and Mark Cavendish is there expecting lead out, how Steve Cummings will adjust to that. We'll see. But he's just an individual. Brian Smith spoke about him last year in the podcast, didn't he, about how that he just needs to be sort of left alone. I think he said he was an artist, didn't he? And he's certainly perfecting the art of winning stages.
He is. And he reminds me a bit of David Moncoutier, the way he lurks at the back and sort of does his own thing. Bit of a libero, isn't he? Bit of a sweeper.
Absolutely, yeah. So no, it was a great week's racing. I think we didn't see the best of Nairo Quintana. He was 2 men down. The Izagirre brothers both fell sick on the eve of the race, so he was 2 men down. I don't know if that affected the way that he rode, but he wasn't perhaps at his best, although he wasn't far off it. But Contador, as I said earlier, was clinical. We should also mention Contador has said that he now will not retire at the end of the year. He'll carry on. So that's, I guess, good news. When Contador's on song, he's great to watch, and it was a sort of calculating but clinical performance in the Tour of the Basque Country. 4th time he's won that race. Joaquim Rodriguez was up there. I thought Thibaut Pinot, I mentioned in the report there, Thibaut Pinot rode very, very well indeed to finish 4th overall, just missed out on the podium. A great week's racing. Should we wrap it up there, guys? Because we've gone on quite a lot in this first remote podcast that we've done together. I'm sure we'll be doing it again.
I'm sure we will. What's everyone up to over the next week? I'm off to a race that I hesitate to call the Hipsters Paris-Roubaix at the weekend, the Trobro Leon in Brittany. Anyone else going anywhere in the coming weeks?
I'll be playing golf in Scotland.
Lovely.
Peebles of all places.
I am going to Flesh Wallone next week for one of these Wellbricks Kilometre Zeros. So we've got lots coming up. We've also got our Friends Special coming up. I mentioned it in the Basque Country report there, but coming very soon is our next Friends Special, our 4th one, or 5th one if you include the prologue, and that is a little trip to Nice in the company of Ian Boswell, Joe Dombrowski and Larry Warbass, and those guys are very interesting, very articulate, and they've got lots of fascinating things to say, so that'll be coming up very soon. Let's wrap up there, shall we? And we'll reconvene next week, perhaps in person. Thank you very much, Lionel.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Telegraph Cycling Podcast with Richard Moore, Lionel Birnie and Daniel Friebe.